So this is the fourth and final video in my deep dive into the timeline of the Madeline Soto case. So if you missed the first three videos, I will provide a link down below for them so that you can catch up with them should you wish. Also, while this video focuses a lot on the morning when Stephan went down to Northport, there's a few bits that I've probably not gone as much in depth into, simply because I have done a rather in-depth video already where I'm pulling together all the different connections here and showing the many lies that exist around this part of the timeline. So I'll put the link for that video below also, so that should you wish to go check that out, you can. Again, huge thank you to all my new subscribers. You guys are so awesome. Loving the community that is building up here. The people in chat are just fantastic. You guys have some fantastic ideas. You push me to higher levels. You make me think more, which is always a good thing. You rock, basically. Also, welcome to the new members. Also, thank you so much to those people who've been giving me super thanks for my videos. Every one of you is fantastic. I appreciate you greatly. Okay, now before we launch into this part 4, I am going to go through the previous parts of the timeline, but having already done 3 videos on them, I'm not going to go in depth or anything. I'm just going to go through, point out the most important points, and then we'll jump into this video. Now, as I mentioned in my previous videos, I've got no problems with anybody screenshotting these slides and using them for their own use, whatever that is, whether you're another content creator or whether you're someone just wanting to get things together in your head and you just want a copy of this. So I'm going to go through the key points in these because it is quite a lengthy timeline even before we get to today's part of the timeline. So we have Maddie going to her party, or her party starts at 3 p.m. We don't know what time she actually went to her grandmother's place. She was dropped off home by her aunt at 8:29. Stephan arrived at 8:41. Jen arrived home at 10:21. At 11:19 you have Maddie's phone going upstairs, and then at 11:38 it is put on the charger. At 11:39 you have Jen and Stephan texting each other, and sometime between 11 and 11:30 the flatmate returns home and reports that she heard sounds in room 4. So that to me says maybe 11:20 to 11:30 that she returned home. At 11:54 Jen's phone gets put on the charger. Then you have the flatmate reporting that sometime between 11:30 and 2:30 she heard sounds from room 4. Now, I will just point out that there's a few things in her timeline that don't quite add up, so they may not be the right times. But apparently she heard through the night sounds coming from room 4. So the following morning you have Maddie's phone being removed from the charger at 7:04, and at 7:16 it is powered down. It is then clearly left in the apartment. Well, possibly left in the apartment. I guess that's a bit of an assumption on my part. Then at 7:30 Stephanie's caught on camera in the Lincoln, and Maddie is seen slumped over in the passenger seat of the car. 7:35 is when he puts the first lot of items into the dumpster. At that point in time he's wearing a red shirt and tan pants. At 7:40 he exits the complex, and then at 8:19, having done a U-turn, He re-enters the complex through the front gate, tries to use the clicker, can't get it to work, gets a security guard to help him, and the security guard witnesses Maddie in the passenger seat. At 8:31, he exits the complex again. So at 9:19, Jen's phone is removed from its charger, and then sometime between then and, let's say, probably 9:30ish, she leaves the apartment for her appointment, because she arrives at her appointment at 9:59, so roughly 15 minutes early. At 9:35, Stephan is seen entering a parking garage on St John Young Parkway. He goes up to the second level, and at 9:41 he is seen placing Maddie into the trunk of the vehicle. Then at 10:14 he returns to the complex, and at 10:17 he makes a 8-minute phone call to Jen. Then at 10:54 he is caught on camera putting more items into the dumpster. This time he has changed, and he's wearing a blue shirt. At 10:55 Maddie's phone is turned back on. We know this is done by Stephan, because at that point in time Jen is still not back from her appointment. At 11:03 Stephan exits the complex through the main gate, goes to the vape shop, where he's caught on camera at 11:22. Then at 11:27 Jen returns to the apartment. So her story of him being at the apartment when she got back is complete utter BS. He wasn't there. So he in fact re-enters the complex at 11:56, and then does his first factory reset on his phone at 12:12. He then once again exits via the rear gate at 12:44. Then you have his car being seen on camera at 1:16, heading along old or near Old Hickory Tree Road, and then it's caught returning at 2:12, at which point in time it has the spare wheel. At 2:37 Maddie's phone records steps, which is consistent with her leaving the apartment to go to Maddie's school, supposedly to pick her up. She leaves the complex at 2:39 via the front gate. Stephan enters the complex via the rear gate at 2:43. At 2:47 he enters the apartment, or is at the apartment. Then at 2:48 Jen has reached Maddie's school and is there with Maddie's phone until 4:10. 3:24 Stephan is seen putting more items in the dumpster, and then 3:28 he immediately returns to the dumpster with more items. 4:36 he puts more items in the dumpster yet again. So at 4:10 you have Jen heading to the grandmother's workplace. Then at 4:30 she calls Maddie's friend. Sometime between 4:10 and 5 she messages Maddie's teachers, gets a response from one of them around 5 o'clock. At 4:43 one of her family members calls 911, not her. Then at 5:03 Stephan arrives at the grandmother's workplace. Between 4:10 and 6 p.m. Jen goes through Maddie's phone. This is approximate. This time is not given specifically in the timeline that's given by law enforcement, but this is the information we've been given via the FOIA request. At 6 p.m. Jen returns to the townhouse. Now someone made a really good point about this when I covered this in the timeline, because according to the maps, you see that they say basically Jen returned to the townhouse. According to the maps, Stephan's phone was still at the grandmother's workplace with Maddie's phone. Someone pointed out to me that given that Jen's family really didn't like Stephan, they questioned whether or not he may have left his phone there and gone back to the apartment with Jen. So that's a good question. At 7:27, you have the deputies finally arriving on scene. At 8:17, you have this Officer Vasquez searching the apartment, and he sees a phone left in the downstairs bedroom. The thing that's curious with that is that we can see from the cell tower data that Maddie's phone was at her grandmother's office that whole time. So if he did see a phone, he didn't see Maddie's phone, or Jen's phone, or Stephan's phone. So whose phone was it? 9:47, Jen and Stephan return to the apartment, and at 12 a.m, Stephan resets his phone once again. Now, at 3:16 a.m, you have the Nissan exiting the complex via the main gate. It takes the same route as the Lincoln, basically to the same spot where Maddie had been left the previous day. So between 3:35 and 4:09, it's out of camera range somewhere along Old Hickory Tree Road. At 4:30, it then returns through the gate of the complex. Then at 11:16, you have Jen being interviewed by Detective Hunt, who then takes Maddie's phone with him at the same time. You have Stephan's interview at 12:05. Both Jen and Stephan are separated and interviewed at 7:16, and at the end of Stephan's interview, his phone is seized. Which of course then brings us up to today's video. Now, in terms of Stephan's phone being taken at 8 o'clock, it was following this that detectives had Jen and Stephan waiting outside their apartment. They hadn't at that point in time told them they weren't going back in, but they weren't allowing them in. They were telling them that they wanted to be able to get the dogs in there, so they weren't letting them back in. So apparently while they were sitting in someone's car, Stephan was trying to use Jen's phone to access his Google account and becoming quite anxious and upset because he couldn't do so because it needed that authentication, the two-part authentication, which he couldn't do without his phone. Jen basically said, well, suck it up, princess. This is according to her, said, suck it up, princess, you can't do anything until you get your phone back, stop stressing. So that's where we are at the start of this video. So again, I'm going to go through various audio clips first to basically give you the narrative according to the people involved. I'm also going to use various documents and maps to show you what it is that I'm talking about. Then at the end of this, I will give you a rundown of what I've covered in this video, as well as a few add-ons such as the dates that Stephan was arrested, the dates of the application for the death penalty, etc. So let's now have a listen to the videos.
How did you get to Kissimmee? Like, what made you go to Kissimmee?
Okay, so I got a call. I got a call at 9:30, and then I think that's when that discussion took place about whether to give this phone to the police or not. I said, "You haven't got any issue with it? Give them the phone. Give them the phone."
So, whenever possible, I've recorded interview times. So, Jen and Stephan were both put into separate interviews roughly around the same time, and I know that Stephan's interview was at 7:16 p.m. So Jen's was roughly the same time. So at the end of Stephan's interview was when his phone was seized. So here on the timeline, they've got it as 8 o'clock, his phone being seized. So Chris Stearns saying that they rang him at 9:30 and had a conversation over whether or not Stephan should hand over his phone. That's inaccurate. I don't know if there was an earlier phone call, but when you listen to the actual interview with Stephan Stearns, when it was that female detective who just did that fantastic job, and she's just kind of asking him about his phone, the resetting and everything, and she just kind of throws it at him from left field. Oh, we'd like to take your phone. So I actually don't think there was any opportunity beforehand for Stephan to have a discussion with anyone over his phone being handed over to police. I honestly don't think that before that interview he saw it coming. So I find it questionable that Chris believes that the 9:30 phone call was a discussion over handing over the phone. Now, because the phone call was clearly made from Jen's phone, we don't have records. It seems that for some reason, and hopefully it's a positive reason, they've withheld Jen's phone records. Let's keep our fingers crossed that they've done that for a positive reason and that there will be charges coming down the pipeline for Jen in the future.
And then I got a call, and then I went to bed. I was 10 or something. I'm all tucked in the bed. I got the boys with me, and I may have been partially asleep because I had my phone on silent, and then I woke up because the phone was vibrating, and then my watch would have been in the office. So the phone was vibrating. By the time I got it, there was no connect. So then that was at 10:42, and then I made an out call at 10:43, and then the conversation was about, you need to come up here.
And who says that?
They both did because they were on speaker.
Okay.
And Stephan said, hey, you need to come up here. And I said, okay. I said, so we discussed, they were being kicked out. They didn't have a place to stay. So I said, well, we need to figure out where to go for, where to stay and what have you.
Now, I've actually gone in depth into this whole hotel timeline in another video. So, hence the reason with this that I'm not really digging in. I will add the link for that video below so you can go and check it out if you like. There's so many irregularities that exist there. But he's claiming that they called him at 10:42 saying that they were being locked out of the apartment essentially. This sets up the narrative that Jen uses later on where she claims that he paid for them to get into the hotel because she couldn't afford it. The thing is, Jen's final interview on the 27th was at 11:32 p.m. and it ended at around 12:09 p.m. and it was shortly before the end of that interview that they informed her that she couldn't go back into the apartment that evening. Now, before that time, they weren't allowing them in the apartment, but they were basically saying that along the lines of that they were wanting to keep people out of the apartment so that the dogs wouldn't be confused with smells, etc., etc. But the actual thing of them saying, okay, we're not going to let you back into the apartment tonight, occurred at the end of Jen's interview, at the end of her 11:32 interview. That occurred at roughly 12:09 a.m. So at the time that they rang Chris, they were not expecting to have to get a hotel. So they actually arranged for him to head to Kissimmee or Orlando before they knew that they were even not allowed back in the apartment. And like I said, I've covered this in great detail in another video, so hop over to that if you want to listen to all that. So in terms of the timeline, yes, he received a phone call at 10:42, but it certainly wasn't them saying they were shut out of the apartment.
So I'm jumping in the shower, packing a bag, talking to Dad, making plans to leave, which I did it just after midnight. I tried to make a call to them at 11:56. It went to voicemail, and then I called her back at, now we're into Wednesday, so I called her back at 12 to let them know I was on my way.
Now, I won't add those phone calls into the final timeline because I'm just using them basically as guidelines for when he left Northport. Now, it's interesting what he's saying there time-wise, because 11:56 would mean he was actually trying to ring when Jen was still in her police interview. And don't forget, at that point in time, Stephan's phone had been taken. Hence the reason there was no answer. Then 12:11 would have been just a few minutes after Jen got out of that interview, which is why he was able to say to her, I'm leaving Northport, I'm on my way.
And then I got a call from them at 1:18, lasted for 2 minutes, and then at 1:51, 50 seconds, because I arrived at the hotel.
So in terms of what was going on around that time, so after Jen finished her interview at 9 minutes past 12, the same officer then interviewed Stephan at 16 minutes past 12. So the officer must have had a break to write notes and stuff like that, and then nabbed Stephan. And Stephan's interview went for just under half an hour, so I make it as finishing around 12:42. So Chris is saying that he had a call from him at 1:18, which was essentially them telling him what hotel they were at. So telling him where to head to, meaning that they have checked into the hotel sometime between 12:42 and 1:18. Obviously, allowing time for travel, we'd say sometime between 1 and 1:18 probably. And then Chris himself arrives at the hotel at 1:51.
And from what I understand, did you pay for the hotel or did they pay for it?
They paid for theirs, and I paid for mine, but then it said a pet-friendly hotel. Pet-friendly if you pay $150 for the night. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, all right. So I paid for the dog to stay.
Okay, their dog.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I actually reimbursed her for it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, while that's obviously not timeline details, the reason I've included it in here is because it goes back to the whole conversation about who paid for the hotel. He's made it clear here. They paid for the hotel, they paid for the dog, he reimbursed them for the dog. So the reason I've included this is to just show that there's actually no reason for him to have gone there in the middle of the night. It would have been far more logical for him to have just left early in the morning. So this doesn't actually... Now, if you listen to their narrative where Jen claims that she got him to pay for the hotel because she couldn't afford it, then yes, it would fit in. But it doesn't fit in when you look at the actual timeline. There's no logical explanation that we've been given for him driving 2 hours in the middle of the night to get to Orlando. Like I said, I've covered this in detail in a separate video, so I won't keep harping on about that here.
All right, and when you got to the hotel, you had conversations with Jen and Stephan, I'm assuming?
Yeah, we were just greeting, gave Stephan a hug and, chit-chatted for a few minutes. I was busy checking in because they had already completed their check-in. They went up to their room. They were on the opposite end of me, but we were on the same floor. I went out to the car to, park my car, get my stuff, and bring it in and go to my room. And then I went to their room, spent about 10 minutes with them, no more than 15, and then I was heading back to my room to go to bed.
Now that part of the timeline is really wishy-washy. He gives different lengths of time that he was in the room with Stephan and Jen, and it could be anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour that he was in that room. So it's a tricky one. I'm not going to play all of that through. Once again, that's in that other video. But he did spend some time in their room having a conversation about something. So in terms of the timeline of Stephan going down to Northport, I'm going to play some clips first from Chris Stearns talking about that particular timeline, and then I'll go through some pages from the documents which are relating to the various surveillance, etc., which then totally home in on that timeline and just clarify it a little bit more.
I got up at 6:30, 3 hours sleep, and went to the office because I figured he would be sleeping in, crashed and burned, and didn't speak to Jen until 10:45-ish, and she called and asked if Stephan was with me, and I said no. Why? Well, he's not here. Oh, we'll go down to the lobby and see if he's down there. How long has he been gone? 25 minutes. Okay. I said, go check the lobby. And then I started to think about it, called her back, and I said, do you have your keys? No, I don't have the keys. So then she said, well, they just called and they're going to be out here within the hour. I said, oh, shit. So I drove out there. So it's probably out to the hotel because I was at my office.
Oh, okay.
So he's claiming that Jen rang him at 10:45 to say that Stephan wasn't there. Now, in another interview, he claims that he thought about it and he rang her back about 25 minutes later. And he's also saying here that he was at his office, and he says in various interviews that he got up at 6:30, went to the office at 7:30. But what's interesting here is this claim that she rang him at 10:45, and so then obviously some amount of time went by, and then she rang him back and said, well, they're going to be here within the hour, which is when he supposedly left his office. That actually doesn't fit the timeline, and you'll see that when we get back to the document. So just bear in mind, he's talking about a 10:45 phone call where he claims that he was at his office.
So he hadn't showed up by the time I got there, and about 30 minutes later, he finally showed up, and I read him the fucking riot act.
So according to Chris's timeline here, he returned to the hotel, and he's saying roughly 30 minutes later, Stephan turned up again. He changes that at another point, and he says that it was 10 to 15 minutes later that Stephan shows up after him. That's closer to the actual truth, but it's still not quite there, and we'll look at that in the documents shortly.
By the time he would have arrived, would have put him at past 6 o'clock, and
Well, we know exactly what time he was. Once again, I don't remember what time it was, but we could put him within less than a mile from your house through dash cam video from Northport PD that was working a crash.
So if you haven't picked it, we're now up to that July interview where Chris Stearns basically went to the police station himself and was like, I want to talk to you guys. And he sounded like he was fishing for information. So here he's kind of fishing for what time Stephan was in the vicinity of the house, and fishing to see if they've got any proof of it. That's my take on it. And they tell him, they're quite clever about the way they do it. They say, we know what time he was there. We've got him on camera, on dash camera. But this whole conversation, they actually are quite careful not to give Chris the exact time that Stephan was there, according to their surveillance. So I think that perhaps they were a bit wary of this interview as well. And for those of us who thought it felt like he was fishing, perhaps the detectives felt the same way. But here it's just highlighting the fact that Stephan went down to Northport, went to the house, not the storage unit. We know in terms of the storage unit, but that was a false lead. They made a mistake with the time on the log, and it turned out that nobody had actually accessed Chris's storage unit that day.
Did you ever confirm that he went to the storage unit?
The records from the storage unit were kind of wishy-washy.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it looked like somebody used your access code, but when we talked to him again, they said the dates and times they may have been mistaken.
So again, I'm not sure if he was just trying to avoid giving too much details to Chris here, because when you look at the documents from Northport PD, you can see quite clearly that what I said, nobody accessed the storage unit that day. Okay, so this is what we get from the surveillance records. They haven't recorded the time that Jen and Stephan arrived at the hotel. They also haven't recorded what time Chris arrived at the hotel. But based on the phone calls that Chris was talking about, and bearing in mind that in that particular interview he was working off a bit of paper where he'd written down times for phone calls, so those times would actually be relatively accurate. So I think we can just run with them. Now, at the top of the page here, which doesn't come up in any of the interviews, at 1 a.m. Stephan's car was towed to OPS. So that's when they seized the car. They had basically informed him at the end of that interview, when it ended at 1:45 or whatever it was. They had informed him then that they were impounding the car, basically. So then we've got all the stuff that happened in the hotel, Chris's arrival, their arrival, them supposedly chatting in the room, all this stuff, yada yada yada. Jen claimed that she had got up to go to the toilet at like 3:30 or something like that, and Stephan was still around. And I forgot to include that clip, but just take my word on that. And then at 4:35 a.m, Stephan leaves the hotel through the front lobby. Then the next time he's seen, so he made pretty good damn time, is 6:29 a.m. He is caught on camera at an intersection that is 1 mile from the Stearns' home. Now, for those of you who have been trained by Grizzly to want map time, I have actually included a map of that location in the video where I discussed this whole trip to Northport in greater detail. So as I mentioned, I'll put the link for that below if you did want to go and check it out. Now, the smoking gun, as you would say, is that the FBI did a cast, and they came up with Stephan logged into Google at Christopher Stearns' address, in other words, down at Northport, between 6:34 and 7:09. So that seems to pretty much prove that he was inside the house. Now, just to offer some clarification there, because I'm still seeing some confusion in people's comments. His computer was in his bedroom. It was not in the garage. Chris Stearns removed it from his bedroom after he was arrested and put it in the garage while he was waiting for Northport to collect it. He claimed that he didn't want it in the house. So at that particular time, the computer was still in Stephan's bedroom. Now we have 7:28. On camera, Chris Stearns is seen leaving the hotel through the front lobby. So that fits with his story of him going to work that morning, if that's what he was actually doing. Then at 7:46 you have Stephan Stearns caught on camera again as he is leaving Northport. So he is first of all caught on camera at the same intersection, and then he's also caught on police video, like body worn camera, because he happened to be driving past where there was an accident. So that really sucks for him. Now, also information that can only be got in these documents here, as opposed to interviews, is that at 8 a.m. the search warrant was executed on the apartment. So that's when they started searching the apartment. Now, next we have 10:21 a.m. and Stephan is recorded back in Kissimmee. This is significant because it basically once and for all clears up any confusion over the storage unit, because the time that they believed that Stephan had entered the storage unit was shortly after 9 a.m. that morning. There's no way known that he could have got back to Orlando in a little over an hour in morning traffic. So this proves, while they also say that they double checked and that showed also from the records that no one accessed the storage unit, I think this is definitive as well. Now, this is where things get a little bit interesting too. At 10:50 on camera, Chris Stearns walks into the hotel in Kissimmee. So he left at 7:30, walks back in at 10:50. Now, obviously, we know he hasn't gone down to Northport, but why is this interesting? Because of how it sits in the timeline. So Chris gave two different times in terms of the difference between him arriving back and Stephan arriving back. He at one point claims that he was back for half an hour before Stephan walked in. Another time he said 10 to 15 minutes, when in reality it was 10:55. In other words, Stephan walks into the lobby 5 minutes after Chris. That's a heck of a coincidence, particularly given that we still don't know the real reason for Chris heading to Kissimmee or Orlando in the middle of the night. Now, there's a few more things here on this timeline that obviously aren't going to come up in the interviews, so I'll quickly go through them. So they searched the Lincoln at 11:45 that morning, and then shortly after lunch was when they found the tyre tread. So if you remember, they had Stephan on camera, so they knew where they were looking, kind of in terms of where he'd been off camera, in terms of where to look for Maddie. So this is obviously before they found Maddie, but they did find the tyre tread on Old Hickory Tree Road. At 3:30, Stephan and Jen were brought into Central OPS and the Nissan was taken into custody. 3:30 would have been the time when, basically following that interview, Stephan was then subsequently arrested. I've gone through documents and stuff, and I can't find the exact time for his arrest. And from looking at the interview, I also can't see the exact time for the interview. So we'll just go with 3:30. They were brought into Central OPS, and then following that interview at some point in time, Stephan was arrested. And then at 5 minutes past 5 was when they located the backpack, the laptop, notes, crock, etc. in the dumpster. Now, just taking a step back, we're looking at around the time that Jen and Stephan were taken into operations. Essentially, they were told they were being transported there for the press conference, but they were both put in separate rooms and given interviews. And it was shortly before that Chris, well, according to Chris, that he gave Stephan his iPhone mini.
A Wednesday, since he didn't have his phone, I had a spare phone I use for business, which I think you guys have, iPhone mini, and I said, here, use this until you get your phone back. Again, thinking everything's innocent and what have you. And so I gave that to him around 3 o'clock Wednesday afternoon.
Now, there haven't been any records released with regards to that phone, so all we have is Chris Stern's word on when he gave Stephan that phone. I'm not sure it is hugely significant. I think had he given it to Stephan the night before, they probably would have done tracking on it like they did with the earlier tracking with Stephan's original phone and Jen's phone. So I'm guessing that probably is accurate. And also, Chris Stearns knows what sort of things that the police can check up on. So I'm thinking that he was probably on the level about that. So we have March the 1st. And that was when they started putting the pressure on Jen and really coming at her hard. And it was following that interview at 4:47 in the afternoon that Maddie's body was located, and we can of course thank the witness who saw Stephan changing his tyre and called in the location for that. Now, before I add in the other important parts of the timeline, I'm just going to backtrack to the storage unit. So if you look at the bottom paragraph here, they're talking about doing a printout from the area, from the storage facility. And if we look at the second last line, or third last line if you look at the last couple of words there, Dennis provided a computer printout of Christopher's account activity from 1st of January to present, which showed Christopher's access code was used twice on the 31st of January at 8:55 and then again at 9:01, basically entry and exit. The only other time his access code was utilised was the 16th of February at 6:11 entry and 6:13 exit. That must have been when he went to fix the lock, so maybe that was actually a true story. Then they've got Christopher's access code was not used as previously thought. However, this information was not known at the time of the lawfully requested and executed warrant. The reason I've got to say that is that you can't lie when you're putting in a search warrant. So they have to show here that they actually believed that the code had been used and that they only got this information after the search warrant had been executed. Now, the next paragraph is also significant. Dennis also provided a list for all users who had accessed the storage facility on the 28th of, and that should be the 2nd, none of which appear to be relevant to this investigation. So that basically sorts out the storage unit. Now, I believe that the arrest for Maddie's, or the charges over Maddie's death, were on the 18th of April, but I will confirm that before I actually put the final timeline together. We also have Chris Stearns handing in the USBs, the computer, and then the hard drive. I'm not sure if they're overly significant to this timeline. They're probably just something to keep in mind as something that did occur. So I'll finish off by going over the important points from this timeline as discussed in this video. So if you remember, I mentioned at the start of this video that Stephan's phone was actually taken at 8 p.m. And yet, according to Chris, they rang him at 9:30, and the reason for that was Stephan, although he had a conversation with Stephan over whether or not Stephan should hand over his phone, and Chris says that he told him that if you've got nothing to hide, then why not? So we know that that's not what was discussed at 9:30, because Stephan's phone had already been taken. At 10:42, Stephan and Jen call Chris to come to Kissimmee. Now, according to Jen, that's because they were being thrown out of the apartment and they couldn't afford a hotel. Thing is, they didn't know that till after midnight, and they paid for their own hotel and Chris reimbursed them. So the reason for them calling him to come to Kissimmee is definitely not because of them being shut out of the townhouse. I will just point out that before that phone call was made was when Stephan was sitting in the car freaking out, trying to get onto his Google accounts on Jen's phone. So at 11:32, Jen was interviewed, and her interview ended at 12:09 a.m, which is when she's informed that she can't return to the townhouse. At 12 a.m, Chris leaves Northport to head to Kissimmee. So he actually left 9 minutes before Jen's interview ended. At 12:16, Stephan is interviewed. His interview ends at around 12:42, and at 1:18, they ring Chris to tell them which hotel they're in, meaning that sometime between 12:42 and 1:18, they found themselves a hotel. At 1 a.m, the Lincoln is towed, and then at 1:51, Chris arrives at the hotel, having been rung at 1:18 with directions as to which hotel they were booked into. Then, at that time, after Chris arrives and checks in, him, Stephan and Jen have a conversation in Stephan and Jen's room, which lasts for some amount of time, between 10 minutes, half an hour, 2 hours. That's covered in my other video which I mentioned, which will be linked below. At 4:35 a.m, Stephan is caught on camera leaving the hotel via the lobby. At 6:29 a.m, the Nissan is caught on camera 1 mile from Chris's home in Northport. 5 minutes later, at 6:39, Stephan logs onto Google at Chris's home, and he's on there till 7:09. At 7:28, you have Chris seen on camera leaving the hotel in the lobby. At 7:46, so over half an hour since he got off Google, Stephan departs Northport. Given that it appears to be a 5-minute difference from where he was clocked on camera to the house, that still means he must have had half an hour doing something in the house before he left. At 8 o'clock, a search warrant is executed on the townhouse, so that's when they begin the search. Now, between 9:08 and 9:16 is when Northport mistakenly believed that Stephan was at the storage unit. We know that's not remotely possible because the Nissan is caught on camera returning to Kissimmee at 10:21. Given it was morning traffic, there's no way known that he could have made it from Northport to Kissimmee in an hour and 12 minutes. It's physically impossible. And of course, like I said, they realised later on that it hadn't happened. Now you have Chris returning to the hotel at 10:50, Stephan returning only 5 minutes later, which to me is very, very interesting. At 11:45 is when they found the tyre tread on Old Hickory Tree Road. So that's when they start narrowing in their search. 3 p.m. is when Chris reports that he gave Stephan his iPhone mini. And then round about 3:30, Jen and Stephan are both brought into Central Ops and are given separate interviews. At the same time, the Nissan is seized so they can do a search warrant on it. And following that interview, Stephan is arrested. At 5:05 that day, Maddie's backpack, etc. are located in the dumpster. Then moving on to the 1st of March, you had the press conference held where they mentioned Stephan changing his tyre and asked for witnesses, and so witness Walter comes forward, reports seeing Stephan and the vehicle. Jen has 2 more interviews on that day, and at 4:47 in the afternoon, Maddie's body is found. So then you have on March the 12th, there are additional CSAM charges brought against Stephan. On April the 18th, Jen has that derivative use interview. April the 24th is when Stephan is indicted by a grand jury for Maddie's death. And then on the 11th of June, the State Attorney's Office announces that it will seek the DP over Maddie's death. So that brings us to the end of the timeline. It's quite detailed. Now, I've said this in previous videos. Please let me know if I've left anything significant out from the timeline. And if it's not something that I've mentioned, can you give me some idea of where I can find that information in case I don't already have it? I will be making the timeline available as a document at a later date, and I'll explain that when I get to that. But here we are at the end of the timeline, finally, 4 very long sessions. Thanks to everyone who has persevered and listened right through. You guys rock. So, thanks for listening. If you are new, please subscribe to my channel. Also, please hit the like button, that'll get more people seeing my videos. And of course, please leave a comment. I love reading everyone's comments. I love the way that everyone is engaging, not just with this video, but with each other in the comment section. So, thanks for that. You guys are brilliant. And I'll catch you in the next one.